us today here at Desertwood Days. I am your host, Kathy Blaze, and today I am here with the lovely Heather Kirk. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much
So-
to Desertwood Days and you, Kathy. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to have you here. Heather, you are a poet, you're an artist, and an artist there's you do a lot in that word artist. You're not just doing one thing. You're a photographer, you paint, you design, you have
Mhm.
fashion, you're an author.
Yes,
So you do a lot under that word artist.
right.
So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So welcome. Thank you for joining us here today. So I like to start with the photography part. I'd like to know, when did Heather pick up her first camera? When did she become interested in photography?
It was very young. My father was interested in photography, and so just kind of following that. I remember in junior high, we had, even at the high school, they had a dark room. So I took photography classes and loved it because it was something my father did, but I also had a heart for travel. So on family vacations, I'd always take pictures with my brothers and then move it aside a little bit and get the scenery or whatever else I thought was beautiful. And they'd always try to be wait, we're not in it. I know.
Like I wasn't trying to get you right now.
You're in a lot of them. So I did start very young. When my dad got his first professional camera, he, had the Consumer Reports out and showed me that, and together we chose a camera, and he taught me on that.
Wow, that's wonderful that your inspiration came from your dad.
Yes.
So that's awesome.
Yeah, and he was an engineer, a civil engineer. And so I think I also got from him the right and left brain to be able to combine those things.
Oh,
So I think that's where a lot of the different things come in for me.
so as a photographer, are you consistently working as a photographer? Is that something that you do all the time in your career?
I would say in my life,
In your
I
life?
do it all the
Okay.
time. So anytime someone asks me to go hiking, I tell them it's going to take a lot longer than you think. We'll be stopping, or I'll be
Because you're
stopping.
bringing your little friend. Huh?
Yeah. Anytime I travel, for that, I really turn them into business trips because I am doing photography a lot when
That's
I travel.
awesome. That's awesome.
I have shown in a lot of places, a lot of local, like Herberger and Gamage, up in Prescott, Van Gogh's Ear, and a couple places back east that my art is shown. At Herberger, I was a curator, and so
Okay.
got to create not only my own show with my own
Mhm.
art, but another show.
That's wonderful. I didn't
So,
know that.
yeah.
I went to an art show once at Herberger, and I really enjoyed it. They really put on a great show there.
Yes.
Really nice. As far as photography, is your father still?
My father died very young.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. It was my first year of college.
Oh, okay.
And I remember it was probably part of what launched me more seriously into photography. My mom kind of kept his closet as a shrine in a way, and had not emptied it out or anything after he died. And so I went in and I took the camera.
Yeah.
I thought I was a part of choosing this camera and learning on it.
Right.
And so I took the camera, and I took his heavy woolen coat because I hated the cold. It was in Chicago. That's why I'm here in Arizona now. But I took those two things. And I think it made me really serious. I always had a warm coat and a camera
And
around my
you were
neck
ready.
everywhere I went.
You were
Yes.
ready. Tell us about one of your most memorable pieces or shoots, I should say.
Oh gosh. I would say something recent, and this will get into kind of how everything came back and combined. So I learned graphic design because of photography, and then I started adding my poems to the photos, and called that poetography, poetry and photography. And created my own book very early. It was right before Amazon started doing books. So I did this way back when you had to go directly to a printer. And And then I started helping other people self-publish.
Okay.
So actually, if I can share a book that I did recently for another artist, Bruce Nelson, who he does documentary film,
Yes.
and then he also does exhibits now. So he
Yes.
did at Mesa Historical Museum Hallelujah hats. So he found his mother's old church hats.
Oh.
And so I photographed, things from the exhibit. So I did like the photography of these hats,
Okay.
and then laid out the book, so that then he had a book for his
And it's
museum
beautiful.
exhibit.
Did you pick the colors and everything, the staging of everything in the book yourself?
I did the staging of the hats.
Uh-huh.
He had, ideas of what he wanted in it, the specific ones in his exhibit. He put different things together. So near the back, we have combinations with jewelry or with shoes. He wanted pink in memory of his mom.
Oh,
so it's a lot of, anytime I do a book with someone, it's really collaborative.
Yes, I love that. I love that pink. I'm glad he chose that.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. He was one of our guests this week. So
Really?
yes, it's
Well, see.
funny you bring up Mr. Nelson. So I love that.
Our arts community is pretty small, or connected, I should say.
You know what? And I think it's bigger than we realize. That's what I'm finding now that we're doing this show, is that we're meeting so many people that are artists in their own right. Yes. So it's bigger than we realize it is. And that's awesome. So someone's going to see you on the show and they're going to say, oh, I didn't know she did that. Or whatever, look how small our art world is, or whatever. So this is awesome. That is awesome. I'm not going to ask you that question because I'm going to save it to later, because we have a few other things we want to talk about. Do you have do you feel that when you're doing your work, you're creating your art, that you're concerned, you have to think about what your when I say your audience would like from you, or what I don't know if you would say your consumers would want from Heather, or is it solely on what's in your mind about the item, if you get what I'm saying?
I do. I didn't go to art school, but I have met a lot of people who have bachelors of fine arts or masters of fine arts. And I know within that system, they're often taught to come up with a concept and then create from the concept and create series. For me, it's really what is moving me at the time.
Okay.
And then I learned as I submitted to exhibits, then they want a theme, they want an artist statement. So a lot of times I'm looking at what I've done to see what comes together, and then creating the concept almost afterwards, or writing down what was happening in my mind at the time and I wasn't totally aware of.
Okay.
And then when there is a call for artists or a call for a certain type of writing, then I really am doing more of searching what I already have done and submitting it.
So, with a lot of artists and some that we've had on the show previously, they're really concerned about things that are environmentally safe, or they're working with things that are from the environment. Do you find yourself doing either of those things?
I think I've had a lot of health problems and autoimmune, and one of the toxicities I had actually from the silver fillings or mercury fillings was mercury. So I did not do any of the darkroom myself. And then when I moved into digital, which eliminates a lot of those chemicals, because the chemicals are being used a lot, and then they dump the mercury somewhere, right? Or the other metals. So when I chose the papers and the ink that my art would be printed with, I did choose non-toxic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So you are also a designer. You design fashion as well.
Yes.
So you brought a couple of items. Can you explain these two that we have here today?
Yeah, so I brought it, it starts with the art. So I brought this blue hydrangea.
Oh, okay, that's
that
beautiful.
was the start of it. And then I was invited by a company called Vita to put my art onto clothing.
Oh,
And so these are an example. It's from the same piece.
can I see that?
Of course.
Okay. So what you do is you design. Do I have it the right way? Basically.
I don't know.
Okay. I'm looking at the back and seeing this. So you design this, which is beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
And you then put this onto whatever the design, the fashion that you're
Right.
selecting.
So they have a software that has the shape of the fashion. And then I can lay it out however I want. So that's where some of the graphic design comes in.
Okay.
So I choose a part of the picture and lay it
Oh.
out how I want
Oh.
on the piece of fabric, on the shape. He has it taped on there.
Okay. and I untaped it.
And then I wanted to see what it would work like in black and white. So this is the
Oh.
same image in black and
Yes.
white.
That's awesome. I love that.
And what's interesting, going back to the environmental concept, so much of clothing right now, it ends up in landfills.
Right, right.
And so the way that Amazon started doing books printing on demand, and now many other companies do it, this is actually clothing on demand.
Okay.
So they don't create it until somebody orders it. So it
Right.
takes, it might take a month to get it. But someone orders it, they print it on the fabric, sew it up, and send it. And so we don't end up with a lot of extra clothing that people don't buy.
Right.
So I really liked that concept as well.
Awesome. So we were talking about Amazon and them ordering, consumers being able to order on demand, so that we're not ordering a bunch of stuff and then they're ending up in landfills.
Right.
Awesome, awesome. These are beautiful, Heather. And I love the way they feel also.
Yes, because you've been a model for me.
Yes, very nice, very nice. So I also know that you moved into, it's like you're going to and as artists we move to things that's aligned with what we're doing. I mean, we pretty much stay in that same alignment in that field. You're also a poet.
Yes.
Can you just tell me how that got started?
I started, high school heartbreak, writing a poem here and there. I didn't do much of it at that time. I did in high school. I had taken all the classes I needed to take. My senior year, I was only doing a half day of school. And so I went in and asked a teacher if I could do Literature of Chicago class as an extra. He said, as long as I did all the homework, I could stay in the class with him. And so I did that and learned not only about poetry, but a lot of nonfiction, a lot of investigative journalism that was being done in Chicago. And so that was a real entree to different types of writing for me.
Right.
And my undergraduate was in business and Spanish, and I did retail for 9 months and just really didn't like sales. And so I thought, what am I doing
people do.
naturally? But people who do, they're good at it.
Yes, they're good at it.
So what was I doing naturally? I was counseling my employees. And so I went back, got a master's of social work, and then I worked in an elementary school for 9 years doing prevention, drug and violence and gang prevention. And I did a summer program, then an after-school program on the arts for at-risk kids.
Oh, okay.
So we did everything, music, dance, poetry, art, everything.
Okay.
So I began to research and include different cultures. So we did Aboriginal culture and Mayan culture and Israeli culture. I wanted to really expose them. But there were some girls who came to me and said they wanted to learn about African American history. And so I revisited Langston Hughes, and his poem, I've Known Rivers, was just amazing because to me it was doing kind of what the Literature of Chicago was doing. It's poetry, but it's bringing in history and culture and what's happening. And that is really when I started writing more.
Wonderful.
And bringing all those things into what I wrote about.
Wonderful. You have a terminology for what you do. Can you tell us what that is?
I call it poetography.
Poetography.
Yeah, that's one of the types of art, and it's how I learned graphic design, really, because I was pushing Photoshop elements and sticking my poems and stories into the images.
Oh. So you brought us a media today,
I
right? That
did.
explains poetography.
I did.
Okay, so why don't we take a look at your media?
So this one is called One Lily Pad to Another, but I kind of affectionately call it Hey Froggy. And this poem I wrote after going to, it was a conference that really was about being allies, different cultures being allies for one another, and how important that is, because at one point in culture and life and history, some people may be under attack, and if we don't support each other, we could be next, or we can have a divisive culture, or all kinds of things can happen if we don't try to understand each other and support each other.
Right.
So I would love to kind of read or perform this poem for you.
Wonderful.
So it's called Hey Frog in the Pot. Hey Frog in the Pot. Actually, I'm going to go back to something. There's a story about kind of a mythology or story about frogs. If you put them into a pot of boiling water, they'll jump out because they know it's too hot and it's dangerous for them. But if you put them in warm water and slowly heat it up, they tend to stay in and die because things happen slowly. And so, hey, frog in the pot, it's time to jump out because too many people are talking about how the water gets hotter and you still stay in. The line that they crossed isn't really that thin. Yet here I stand watching as they turn up the heat, and one day I might be in the stew as the meat. So I'll work on the fire if you will jump out. Then we'll really give them something to talk about.
I love that.
Thank you.
You know what? I was just waiting on you to do some of the scratching or something over there. And you were getting into it. I love that, Heather. That was nice. That was nice. So you also brought a couple other books. How many books have you authored?
2.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one is called We, A Spirit Seeking Harmony for a World That's Out of Sync. And that's based on a poem I had written for my brother after my father died.
Okay.
And it's in 5 chapters, and it goes with Isaiah in the Bible where God was calling him and he said, I'm a man of unclean lips. Like I'm not good enough to be called. And so my part of that is a world that's out of sync, is the man of unclean lips. So the first chapter it's very heavy. It's about difficulties in this world, various people that I met or stories that I had heard as well as my own. But then it moves through to the point where Isaiah is ready and says, here I am, send me. So it takes people through kind of that process. And that was my first book back in 2004.
Okay.
So, and then this is totally true. I water dead plants. And so
I'm sure there's a lot of people that can relate to that.
Right. The day I dropped
Charlie
the
said,
book,
don't talk about dead plants.
I know, and it's an agave on there, sorry. The day I dropped it, a friend had also posted quit watering dead plants.
Oh.
I'm like, well, it takes discernment, right, to know which ones. But a lot of plants that I water resurrect miraculously, amazingly, and others don't, but this one didn't and made it on a book cover, so we never know, right? But again, there's always in the poems, there's multi-levels. It may be representing relationships or past pain or grief, and again, I always want my poems and my books to have hope in them and to lead people to faith or trust or reconnecting and healing.
I love that. I love. And you know what? That's what a lot of us want.
I know.
No matter what our gift is or our purpose is, I think the majority of us want people to survive,
Yeah.
to be happy, and live a great life.
Yes.
You also mentioned that you did a TED Talk.
I did. I did TEDx Fountain Hills in 2017. People always ask, where can I find the video? And unfortunately, that was lost. So I may have to recreate it one day. But the concept was the weaver of light and life. And in my life, my faith, that's the Christian faith, that it's God that is really controlling things. And so I think about, like, I have many decades to see now and look back how all these different strengths, business, because now I'm using business. Like I only did 9 months of retail, but as an artist, you have to know business, right? So I'm using business. In the social work, I use the Spanish. I traveled to Dominican Republic, used the Spanish there, did some private mission work there, learned about the fashion industry there and some of the abuses in the fashion industry, learned about sex trafficking there. And so that kind of comes back to any of my art books I do donate to prevent sex trafficking and human trafficking. But all these things, I think of like the Weaver of Light and Life has to do with God's on top. He knows the final pattern. But our lives are like all these strings and knots and things hanging down, and it's a mess to us. But later on, we can see the pattern and what God's doing. And so that's what my talk was really about.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love that. We have Heather, the photographer. We have Heather, the published author. Heather, the fashion designer. Heather, the woman of God.
Amen.
I love that. There's multiple levels. All these levels create who you are.
Right.
And who the artist is.
Right.
And we are lucky to have you here with us. I'm so happy to have you here today, Heather.
Thank you.
Where can our audience find you?
HeatherJKirk.com, middle initial J. And from there, there's links to all kinds of stuff, to the fashion, to the books, to art, graphic design, everything.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what's next for Heather?
What's been interesting about pandemic and when things kind of got very quiet and people stayed home is I have a lot of people who are writing books and they'll tell me, I'm writing a book, can you help me? And then it might be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years before they get to the point where they're ready to be edited and lay it out and sell the book. Okay. So what was pretty cool is that I had several people that I'd heard that from who finally had the time to kind of settle down and finish the books and everything. So I'm in process with a few, finished a few, but there's more books coming. And I love helping to birth people's dreams.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And then I do a writing group for people who feel called to write, called by God. And twice a month, I just lead them in writing and publishing and their ministries or missions.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us today. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us today here on Desertwood Days. Catch you next time.